Hi folks, Clancy here. Before we get started, I just wanted to give everyone a heads up this podcast will include spoilers, as well as themes of animal deaths, gruesome nightmares, and sexual content. As a result, this video is not recommended to be watched with or shown to small children who cannot handle these topics. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to On the House, the podcast where we talk about movies, TV shows, and video games because, hey, whatever we want to talk about's on the house. Joining me today is Matthew,
Hello.
Lynette,
Hello.
and Dave.
Here I am.
Well, folks, this week's pick was Dave's, so let's have him introduce this film, which, as you know, it's a cat movie, and it's not the Aristocats.
And that's actually a line from this.
My favorite line in the movie. I keep quoting it.
But anyways, this is compared to our first show, which we did on a series where even if you've never watched it, it's something you've definitely heard of. This is one you likely have not heard of. The title is Felidae. It was originally a novel in German in 1989, and it was adapted in 94 into an animated film, which is what we'll be talking about today. And it's basically a horror film noir with cats.
Not for kids.
Oh,
Definitely not for kids.
It's not like Watership Down where it's intense but still could be for younger audience. No, this is a hard R.
Yeah, for our American listeners, just so you're aware, you know how in the United States animation kind of has this reputation as just being for kids? Yeah, the rest of the world does not share that opinion. There's some... They just view it as another form of storytelling, which is what it really is. But, like I said, do not watch this with your 4-year-old.
And if you do want to watch it, YouTube is going to be your only chance to, because even though there was an English dub that we all saw, it's never been officially released in the United States. You'd have to get a DVD player that could play Region 2, and that the disc alone I checked on Amazon cost like $300.
Damn.
Damn.
Yeah, the sex scene and the gore was really not something I was entirely expecting. Like, I guess I was sort of expecting the gore because I was told it is an adult film, but the idea of having a sex scene between cats was a little bit new.
So, as we get started, may I just ask everybody, what was your, since I had known about this one for years, but I just introduced all of you to it, what are your general first impressions? One at a time, please.
I actually really like the film. Very entertaining film. I don't really know how else to describe it. I mean, it's very entertaining. And yeah, it is gory. A lot of cussing. Altogether, it's fun to watch.
I thought it was kind of, meh. I think that probably the book was a lot better than the movie. The movie seemed really like the runtime is like an hour, which is pretty short, and
It's an hour and 18 minutes.
You can definitely feel it in the sense that the characterization and the plot it feels really rushed, and it definitely feels like the sort of thing where it's better to read the book than watch the movie.
And I do actually have that book, and I have the copy right next to me right now, in fact.
But I really did like the one scene, though. There was one scene in the movie that I genuinely loved, and that was the scene where the priest raises all these cat corpses from the dead, and that was insanely
Oh, I know you
cool.
love that one.
That was the one part I genuinely enjoyed. It was a very cool visual, and it was very interesting to see Gregor Mendel in such a context. But I thought it was very cool to see him in that sort of context, even though it wasn't. I thought it was pretty badass.
And just to give everybody who's listening to here who isn't familiar with the movie a general plot synopsis, it's about this cat named Francis who is moved to a new town with his owner, and as he's just going around the neighborhood, he's finding lots of other cats dead in rather graphic fashions, and it's clear there's a killer going around, and he has to find out who it is.
Yeah, and I'd say for my part, this film's, for one, it's beautifully animated. Still holds up today. I think there was maybe one scene that I was kind of noticing the animation on in a negative way, but aside from that, it's a beautiful looking film, even as gory as it can get, which I will say the one nightmare sequence is definitely one of the standouts, but there's other scenes that are equally intense.
Of all the gore scenes, that the nightmare one was the least gory.
Like, funnily enough, for the bulk of the movie, all the gore is just body discoveries, but they managed to just get the most out of just walking in on a corpse.
But do not be expecting Aristocats, because that's not what you're gonna get.
I just have one general question for you guys before we go into spoilers. Do you think someone being a cat person would make them like this more or less?
I don't know.
You know,
think
that
it
sounds like a
really-
good question for Colin.
Where's
Because-
Colin when you need him?
I feel like it
I
would
should show him this
help
film,
them
and then I could
establish
get
an
back to you on
attachment
that.
to the character.
Because, I mean, it's not a cats versus dogs story. It's all cats in this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I question the genetic breeding of that one cat, but we're going to go into spoilers here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So when I say that the nightmare sequence not being nearly as gory as like some of the other parts, I'm specifically referring to the two parts, which is the pregnant cat being eviscerated, that was pretty graphic. That was way more graphic than the nightmare scene, and also the experimental fluid that was like dropped onto the cat's brains and melting their brains
Oh,
from the inside
yeah.
out. Like
Yep.
that was pretty. Like I would say the nightmare sequence didn't even come close to those two things, because those were pretty viscerally shocking.
Yeah, that actually that surprised me when I first saw that. How he was pouring acid into his brain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and what was weird though is that I felt like I was going into this thinking like, okay, this is supposed to be an adult, mature story, but the only parts that were adult or mature were the parts with gore and sex and the sex scene, and everything else was basically Secret of Nim. Like it wasn't really an adult story. There was definitely adult themes in it, but it wasn't like a mature plot. It was a pretty, kidsy friendly plot. It's just they decided to add gore and a sex scene in it to add to the shock value. I don't know if you guys have seen Secret of Nim,
It's one of my
but
favorite movies.
well, I thought it was very similar. Like, it's a very similar story in the sense that, but like with Felidae, the focus is put on this, amateur detective cat, whereas in Secret of Nim, the focus is put on the mom trying to protect her kids. But like the gist of the story is the same, which is that these animals that were experimented on, and they're taking, what they learned from the humans that experimented on them and applying it in some way.
I was going to say, one of my favorite scenes was like shortly after Francis meets the blind cat, he's later talking with a cat who knows how to use a computer, and he like keeps a list of all the victims for reference, and then he mentions like a sixth victim, and he's like, who's the sixth? And then he starts typing the name, and you realize it's the one he just met. The first time I watched this, that was the first moment that got to me.
Mm-hmm.
Especially what comes right after.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
When he runs back over there.
Oh yeah, that
And you
was.
just find the
that
poor
was pretty
blind
crazy.
cat just freaking decapitated.
Yeah, you could argue it's a bit of a woman in fridge moment, but man, even though she's only on screen for a couple minutes, you get an impact out of this character. You really, despite the short time you know her, you really feel bad for her after she's killed.
It was even worse in the book because when he finds the body, like her owner's crying over the corpse.
Oh, jeez.
Like, oddly, as much as the nightmares are what are sticking out for you guys, there's one more nightmare scene that was left out from the book that was arguably even more graphic, and it actually tied into something the movie version left unexplained. Basically, one thing I didn't even pick up on until somebody like pointed this out on the differences between the book and the movie posters, that like in the movie they never explain what the reason was the pregnant cat got killed. Like they give a motive for like the first 4 victims and the blind cat dying, but like her reason was never explained. It would have turned out like one of the, because the killer, the cat who's basically trying to, I forget what this term is, but it's sort of like a reverse breeding to make domestic cats more like, it's okay. I'm just going to directly read. Select, and I quote, selectively breeding domestic creatures to create something similar to their wild ancestors is a real practice called breeding back. And basically, like one of the, there was like in the book it explains there was a male cat from the pure breed the killer wanted, who ended up mating with her, and like the killer didn't want kittens like that were mixed breeds. So
That's what I figured
Oh,
was what
okay.
happened. Because, like, he said, because they said that Kong was his name, that it was most likely his children in her belly. But I kind of figured that, like, oh well, she must have been killed because she was those were actually tainted children from whatever creation the other cat made.
and also the cut nightmare would have been like Francis seeing one of the first two like victims, like a form of them just like ripping kittens out of like a stomach and just tossing them against the wall. Like
Oh, gosh.
Damn, that's
Damn.
pretty graphic.
That is.
I will say one scene I absolutely loved that wasn't the nightmare scene was when he kind of discovers that cult, no way of speaking. Just the way that was done and the chase that followed, the pacing, the animation, all that was on point.
it actually, that since you brought it up, like the Aristocats line is straight from the book.
Which is awesome because it's just a great line. Another thing I'll say is I actually thought this had a pretty decent mystery. I personally guessed wrong on who the killer was.
It
Who did
had
you think the killer was?
I thought it was the cat that you find underground, surrounded by all the bodies, because he looks like he'd been experimented on.
Oh, you're talking
Oh,
about
okay.
the keeper of the dead.
Yeah. So I thought he was gonna, maybe not necessarily he was the killer, but he was the cat that everyone was talking about.
And that brings me to another question I always like when watching a mystery. Who did you guys think it was on your first viewing?
I
Who
mean, I
did I
don't think
think
I
it
made
was?
any.
I didn't make an assumption.
I didn't make a solid assumption, but I kind of was thinking like, oh, it's probably the cult leader, or it probably turns out to be like a human or something, and then I
I
didn't
thought
make
it
too
was a
many hard
human,
assumptions.
but
Mhm.
I mean, like I know that they were trying to imply that it wasn't a human because it's like, oh well, these are made by claws. These weren't made. Well, but it's like okay, but it's not exactly convincing. Like, so it could have just as easily been like a human.
And I like how the English dub accidentally spoils the killer, because in one of the dream sequences he sees like the prophet, and the voice actor uses the same voice for like who he really is. So
Yeah, fortunately, I did not catch that at all, so I was able to still enjoy the mystery.
I thought
And
one thing that would have been one thing that really would have been cool to see more of if they added a little bit more about darn, what was the name of like that cat that was experimented on that survived? What was the name of him again?
I think it was like a Claudandus. Was that the one? Like the
Claudandus, yeah.
main
So
villain?
yeah,
I
yep.
thought it was really interesting how towards the end the doctor, the drunken doctor scientist guy who was doing the experiments, he starts to hear Claudandus speaking to him, and Claudandus challenges him to a battle. And I was so bummed that we didn't get to see this epic battle between this drunk scientist and the cat. That would have been so amazing. Because it's just such an interesting concept, like the idea that like, it's sort of like that gladiator thing, the idea that you can battle for your freedom. And so like Cloudandus being this cat, just an ordinary cat that's just sort of subjected to all these experiments simply because he's capable of surviving it. And it's almost to sort of and the idea that he can fight his way out of it, like now that he has proven himself worthy to pass all of these experimental tests, and at the very end of it, he fights like the boss, and so it's sort of like that gladiator idea of like, and it's interesting to think that like, at the time that must have been what he was thinking this was. He like, with his rudimentary understanding of like what's going on in this lab, all these cats come in and none of them leave alive except for him, and he is continuously put through multiple tests over and over, and he passes every one. And so he can't help but think like, oh, so that's what this is. This is a fucking competition. And if I win,
Yeah.
if I defeat you, then I can go free. And then, and obviously he won, but like, it would have been amazing to see that. And it would have been amazing if they played a little bit more off of that, because like that sort of mentality and that sort of like the character growth going through that would have been really interesting to see. And I really like that concept. The idea that as soon as he won, though, he sort of became exactly he became that same drunken scientist guy.
I kind of liked how they even kind of hinted that he knows exactly what he is,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but
Well, and
he's
that was
so
cool
far
too.
gone he can't do anything about it now.
Right, that was cool too. That was interesting. The ending, where he realizes that he is in fact the exact curse that the science. Well, because that doctor, taking all these cats off the street and slaughtering them for the purpose of, his misguided experiments, and he became exactly what he defeated. And he
Yep.
realized that he was in fact a curse on exactly what he was trying to improve. And it was interesting to see that
When
self-awareness
he
at the
said,
very end.
"I used to be good."
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a really
that was
powerful moment, really.
I will say, going back to why they didn't show, that's one thing they had to change from the book. In the novel, like the video journal he discovers was just a regular journal, so they had to make it more visually stimulating for a movie.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
does make sense.
And had they
Well-
if they had actually showed that, that kind of would have been like a giveaway. But
well. I mean, the fact that they certainly did make it visually stimulating in the sense that they showed the whatever the substance was that they dropped onto the cats going directly into their brains, which
Yep.
I thought was so strange, because it's like, if you're trying to heal cuts, why would you do it on the skull? Why would you not pick the leg or something? They have 4 legs. They only have 1 skull. And even then, it's not like you need living flesh to make sure that the flesh comes together with a substance, right? Like, it was very, very, very strange experiment that didn't make any sense.
Because science.
The guy was drunk 90% of the time.
I guess, yeah, but I feel like that excuse only goes so far.
So there's a simple answer for that. It looked really cool.
so there's one
Fair.
thing about this movie that has been somewhat of an internet urban legend for a few years, but was that a big question was, were there any actual recognizable names in the English dub? Because there have been a lot of names that were falsely attributed to it, but have been disproven otherwise.
Yeah, I will say I totally, with the best friend cat, I forget his name right now, but
Bluebeard.
yeah, Bluebeard, who is another person who I thought was gonna be the murderer, and I can discuss that in a minute. I swore I heard that voice before.
I remember reading that a lot of people thought Francis in the dub was supposed to be Carrie Elways, but apparently he said he doesn't remember doing anything like this. So.
You know what's kind of strange? I know that it's a story that's focused on the cats, but a lot of these cats were pets, and for some reason we don't at all see like human reactions. Like, do people in Germany just not care about their pets or something? Like,
And what
they're not at all exploring like what on earth is killing our cats? Like,
and what
what's
about the
going
one
on?
guy whose house burned down at the end?
Oh
Oh
yeah.
yeah, the guy
That
was
poor guy.
well, and what about all those experiments too? Like all these cats disappearing off the street to the mad
Well,
doctor's
I
house.
think
Like,
the
did
novel
nobody notice what was going on?
made
It seems
explicit
like
those were
something.
strays he was using for the experiments.
Oh yeah, that's fair. There's strays. Yeah, I guess it's just still a little. It's still a little weird. You'd think that somebody would notice stuff like that.
Well, it's kind of my guess is why they did it is the same reason they always have phones don't work in horror movies. If you have some kind of like bigger authority that can step in, it ruins the tension.
True.
Yeah, I guess so.
It does.
And real quickly, going back to Bluebeard, I absolutely love this character. Just some of the lines he said were the best in the entire movie. I actually suspected two people were going to turn out to be the murderer. The cat I mentioned earlier and him. And part of it was because he was kind of just so happened to show up right after some bad thing almost killed our main character.
Right.
And the other part is because if you're a fan of folklore, you know Bluebeard is actually a old fairy tale about a person who would cut off the heads of the wives that he married.
There actually is an explanation for the whole he shows up at so many convenient times aspects. Because he's actually like the movie gave him a lot more scenes than he has in the book, just so Francis could have someone to talk to. It's the same
Okay.
reason why they added that one kid in Coraline, just so you wouldn't have a main character going around constantly talking to themselves.
Gotcha.
Like he is into source material, and his role is generally the same, but he doesn't like he doesn't follow Francis underground. He doesn't follow Francis to the house in the finale. Like,
Right.
Makes sense. But yeah, I genuinely that was my favorite character in the whole thing.
I
I
agree.
thought, if anything, that the most damning evidence for Bluebeard wasn't that he was conveniently around. I mean, that was definitely part of it. It was the fact that he was so nonchalant about a lot of things. He's just I don't know. He
That's
seemed
why I
like to
didn't
think
think it
that
was
like the
him in the
deaths
first place.
were
I never
somewhat
thought it was him
interesting, but
just
not
because
really
he
worth
just didn't
exploring.
care.
Yeah, he just didn't care, and it's like, well, why don't you care? Like, and why aren't you, thinking that maybe you're gonna die? And like, are you prepared to fight whatever is, killing all these cats? Do you, yeah, what's, I don't know. He just seems so nonchalant about the whole thing.
Yeah. Which
But
is exactly why I didn't think it was him. He just didn't care.
because he didn't have a stake in the game, I thought
Yeah,
that was kind of,
he was just there.
yeah.
One other thing I want to bring up is that the title of the movie is actually kind of a hint of what the big mystery is all about.
It is.
yeah, I think you can go back to what you wanted to talk about Mendel and that.
Oh yeah. So I mean, because the only reason I even know who Gregor Mendel is because I'm a biology major, and so we would of course talk about him in genetics, talking about like the father of modern genetics, and so it was very strange to see a movie, and like I never would have guessed that the first time that I ever saw Gregor Mendel in a movie that he would have such a malicious and also kind of badass portrayal, because when you think of the guy, you think of, oh, just this monk who's just sort of bored and is like, well, I wonder if I could make peas grow taller or shorter, or if they'll be this color or this color. And it's like, and it's such a, and it, the work he did was such a landmark in genetics. Like, there's a reason they call him the father of modern genetics. It's just kind of funny to see him in this context be portrayed as like this terrifying presence, and he's raising cats from the dead and puppeting them with his controls, and it's like, oh my word, what is this? What alternate universe did we enter in which Gregor Mendel is this terrifying eldritch being? Like, it was very cool, but very strange. But I did like. I mean, it definitely like if you know who the character is, then you kind of get like a. You kind of already instantly get an idea because, like, they want to show the giant painting, like the painting that you couldn't possibly miss, the painting that's the size of an entire wall, and then it says
Mhm.
Mendel underneath, and it's like for somebody who doesn't know who Mendel is, it's just sort of something that comes up later. It's a like a foreshadowing. But for somebody who knows, you're like, well, there's this giant red flag that like that no, and it's like, oh, it's a genetic experiment. Okay, I guess that's what's going on. So
It kind of
I
reminds
thought
me,
the addition
actually.
of Mendel was very strange, but very ended up being very cool.
It. I forget the movie this happened in, but it's another mystery type film where it's an American detective and he's questioning, I think it was a Chinese American, and someone in that scene actually says who did the murders in Chinese, but of course he doesn't speak it, so he doesn't know. But they didn't stop and think, wait, people in the audience might actually know Chinese, so for a lot of people in this movie, I'm trying to remember what the name was. They were like, okay, we know who he did it. Move on, please.
Well, and it's not like there wasn't still a mystery though. Like this, there was still a mystery in the sense that you didn't know exactly who was pulling the strings behind all the murders or anything. It's just that the mystery of, okay, well, like what is even going on? What does it have to do with anything? And you instantly know, oh, cats are dying and genetics is involved, so there must be some sort of breeding program, okay? And like, but it was, I mean, it's not like there was no mystery at all. Like, it wasn't like they actually revealed the murderer. The murderer was Gregor Mendel all along. Now that would have been interesting. The undead Mendel coming back. I need to see that horror movie.
I'm sure somebody will make it.
Probably.
Well, anyone got anything else they want to say? Dave, do you got any behind the scenes facts you'd like to share?
Okay, well, I recall reading this was actually, for the time it was made, the most expensive animated film from Germany. It was based on a book series where there's actually 8 installments, but only the first 2 got translated to English if you want to read it.
Okay. I am curious, when was the book written?
The book was 89.
89? Okay, so that makes sense.
I was
Because
really
I did get
surprised to find
somewhat
out
of.
how recently the film was released. I didn't realize it was like something from the 90s.
Yeah, I knew it was something from the 90s just because the animation matched the quality of what you got in the 90s. I will say that does kind of explain the ending because I did get some Lion King vibes with the final showdown.
Oh, that is totally.
Oh, definitely.
But
Yeah, I totally
if the
thought
book
that
was written first, then you can't really call it a knockoff or anything.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I thought the ending totally reminded me of the ending of Watership Down, the final battle.
That's pretty accurate too.
I mean, because he totally gave off a Woundwort vibe at the end when he's like all bloodied and jumping at him with his teeth bared, and it's like, oh, okay, it's Woundwort now. Like, okay, I get this. Except Woundwort was absolutely unrepented or unrepentive at all, and this guy apparently realized how evil he was. He just thought that his calling was more important than the lives of his fellow cats.
Which, in all fairness, there's only so many ways you can show four-legged animals fight. It's not
That's
like
true.
they know karate or anything.
And
They
one
will
other
bat
I
their
mean, if
paws
you've
at each
seen
other
if you've
and
seen
bite
a
each
real
other.
cat fight, though, those can get pretty interesting. Like the
Real cat
choreography
fights
is
don't
very
go in slow
strange.
motion.
What'd you say?
I said real cat fights don't go in slow motion. They're
Yeah,
incredibly
well, there's
fast.
that too. I mean,
But they also set the house on fire, and most cat fights don't do that either.
man, that would be terrible.
And one other bit of trivia I have is that in the one of the probably the biggest change from the book is that there's way more of an epilogue in the novel. Like, in case the movie made it ambiguous, like Bluebird is alive and well at the end of the book, even because he never goes to the house. And they actually do make a point of getting the cat from the underground to come out and finally get an owner, so there is closure for him.
Good deal.
I mean, not to sound totally mean, but that was a damn ugly cat. Who would adopt that cat?
Nitty,
Well-
did you see Mom's cat before it died?
Well, okay, but the
That
reason
thing
why
was
that cat looked awful was
Scraggly.
not
I can
enough
appreciate how the movie had a lot of different varieties of cat to
Oh yeah,
draw
for
from the
sure.
characters.
Aside from the one chase scene where a lot of them basically look the exact same, every character was designed so they just visually you knew who it was, which when a film's as fast paced as this one, you need that.
Yeah, no kidding. You can't be guessing who the characters are the whole time if it's if it's only an hour and 20 minutes.
Mhm.
Does seeing the movie make you want to try to find the book?
Yeah, actually, it kind of does. I'm curious to see where they go in more detail.
Well, I don't read books, so no.
No, I don't know. I feel like I've seen this kind of story before, and it just doesn't seem terribly worth exploring. I'm sure the book is probably better than the movie because I think the movie lacked a lot of character building, which is a product of the runtime more than anything else.
See, I'll disagree with you there. I thought, at least with the main character, there was quite a bit of development, but
Well, with
just
the main character, sure, but with the villain, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot there. They like like I said, I wish they would have added a little bit more in terms of like the final battle, and they never really got to around to explaining exactly why he was bringing cats back to their ancient roots. I mean, we really know is that he's basically carrying on the mission that the Mad Doctor was carrying on, but we never got a reason as to why he was doing that. We also got we got like a little bit of a snippet of remorse, but I don't know. I just felt like for the vast majority of the characters, and there were a lot of characters, and they did have distinct designs, but I feel like the distinct designs were sort of a didn't have much character building. So it probably comes across a lot better in the book. But
I mean, as for the motive, he's basically kind of just Cat Hitler.
pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but that's not really characterization. That's not a replacement for character building.
I do think, like, even though this is more pre-reveal, like when we know him just as Pascal, I think he does have a few more scenes in the book. But like, actually, they removed a scene where he teaches Francis how to use the computer. And which, would you want a pet who knows how to use the computer?
No.
No.
Considering how the internet works now, no.
Well, I would just be scared they'd delete stuff.
I guess it really wouldn't matter if I had a pet that knew how to use the computer because I just don't use my computer.
That's fair.
You know what? If I had a pet, let's put it this way. If I had a pet that was smart enough to use a computer, first thing I'd do is create some mad, horrible experiments to torture it to the point of where it feels like it needs to fight me in order to escape. And then I'll die a horrible, fiery death because I was too drunk to get away. And then the cat will continue to use its computer skills as well as its newfound horrible hatred for everything that I was to become exactly what I was.
Nice plot. Where'd
Well
you get
then.
that?
Yeah, where'd I get that? I know. It's like a brand new idea.
And one last thing that's pleasantly surprised me is that the theme song they made for this is actually really good.
Yeah, I did like the song. Wasn't it Boy George who did it?
Yeah. And I'm surprised it actually goes into story details and not just a generic song.
Not just a generic song, yeah.
Yeah. Or like that one Eminem just did for Venom where he's like, name drop Eddie Brock right here. Okay, done.
That's the worst part of that song? Really? Not the...
There's many problems with every single song Eminem did post-recovery, so it's not worth going into.
So I think we should about wrap this up now. What do you guys think, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad I was able to introduce you all into this story. It's been a bit of a cult classic for me. It's one I come back to every once in a while. Like I rewatch it at least once a year.
No, I definitely am glad that you introduced that to us, because that probably will end up being a movie that I watch probably once a year.
Yeah, for
Definitely
sure.
grateful for the Gregor Mendel scene. I will watch that over and over. That was awesome.
Yes, I know you will.
Come on. Evil priests and zombie cats. It's cool.
I'm still surprised that hasn't been a heavy metal cover yet. As for me, I thought it actually has a really good, engaging story that I kind of want to go back and watch now that I know exactly what all the plot twists are. Just pick up on, oh, that was a more subtle hint that I didn't catch on the first time. I feel like this is one that'll really benefit from multiple viewings, so yeah, I
True.
recommend it if you're a fan of adult animation, and I'll be watching it again.
And it's just, if you like cats, who knows, maybe this will be something you really like. And the atmosphere is dark, the main character is charming, and the mystery's fun enough. Like, it's not blatantly obvious who it is at first, and it's just some of the visuals get really messed up, and that can be a positive or negative depending on the person. But this is something that, if you didn't know it existed, check it out. And it's free on YouTube. That's going to be the only way you're able to see it.
And hey, if you're a furry, you'll enjoy the sex scene. You get to watch a cat orgasm.
The funniest thing is that that's actually plot relevant.
It is. You can't even claim it was gratuitous. It technically does feed into the plot.
I mean, it's
And
still
we are down a rabbit hole.
nowhere near as terrifying as what we learned about the Cats movie this week.
Oh my gosh.
What are you talking
Oh
about?
my gosh, you're right.
What, you don't know what we're talking about? You're innocent. Don't dig deeper.
We'll tell you guys after the podcast wraps up. But
Okay.
since we've pretty much covered all we want to, it's Lynette's pick next weekend. Lynette,
Oh
give
yeah,
us a
so
tease.
I'm really excited. We're gonna be seeing something that came after the era of Jaws. We talked about Jaws and what an iconic movie it was, and how it spawned all these movies that followed in that, not only in that same sort of formula, but it also spawned a bunch of shark movies. This time, it's not a shark movie. So very excited to present this movie. It definitely has some interesting editing and plot choices. So I can't wait.
Sounds good. And thank you, folks, for watching this video. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and be safe out there, people. And I would like to thank all my co-hosts for joining us today.
You bet.
Yeah, no problem.
And folks, we know this is a very difficult time for a lot of people. So just remember, if you ever feel hopeless or that there's nothing that you can do, remember the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. There's help out there, folks. You are not alone.